Tom King. I was there when he was writing his Batman run between 2016 and 2019, and I saw Heroes in Crisis unfolding in real time in the middle there. My opinion on him is so something that I did not just decide to severely dislike now in the present day, but because I also believe in neutral middle ground that acknowledges pros and cons. I can see and point out what Tom King has been able to do. Short stories that have a fixed ending for him to write towards. They might not be perfect, but at the very least they are told more functionally than the ongoing comic series that he has written, like the previously mentioned Batman run and his Wonder Woman run. Compared to those two, Tom King has been better at single-issue stories when they are not done as filler in the middle of his main ongoing run, and limited-issue miniseries like the one this video is supposed to start covering eventually. Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which is an 8 issues long miniseries that came out between 2021 and 2022 that Tom King based on the 1968 novel True Grit by Charles Portis, and is going to be adapted into a movie following James Gunn's Superman starring Millie Alcock. Because after mid-2010s, comic books were just pitches for movies and television shows. But, that aside, this comic book is going to be the basis for the 2026 Supergirl movie to the point of using the same characters from it. So, after having known that it exists and having heard mixed opinions on it, mostly positive I should add, I better read it for myself and do a commentary before the movie comes out, before I go see it myself. Issue 1. Despite whom the comic is named after, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow starts with a narration of an alien girl named Ruthie, whose unnamed father was killed by a savage named Krem when he was unarmed, and Ruthie wants to return the murder weapon back to its owner. This narration also includes some spoilers from the end of the story, but you won't notice it if you have dyslexia like I do. Krem of the Yellow Hills is assumed to have been a King's agent sent to test the locals, and Ruthie's father was killed for having offended him. She and her brothers clearly had plans to find retribution, but her mother clearly did not want to lose any more of her family to the same fate, and so told them to pray that universal karma would claim Krem with time. That still didn't stop her from letting Ruthie from taking her father's mouth to go look for a muscle to hire on a revenge mission. Unfortunately, the first candidate she pitches her revenge mission to at the closest watering hole, with her father's murder weapon as the bounty, decides to take the sword and walk away with vague promises of completing her revenge mission. Then a drunken woman grabs the sword from him while rambling about it being her 21st birthday, and starts a fight that she is able to win thanks to having some of her speed left under a red sun. Yeah, that is Supergirl, who later wakes up hungover in a room with Ruthie and Krypto the Superdog. Despite the state she is in, her previous showcasing of her abilities impressed Ruthie enough to ask Supergirl to take the job of hunting and killing Krem. But because she is a superhero who doesn't do that and is not at full strength under Red Sun, Kara declines. Ruthie refuses to take a no for an answer and follows Supergirl to her ship back to Earth to repeat her pitch to hunt Krem down. Kara once again tries to politely let her down by declining and vaguely mentions that she understands her loss, without mentioning how, which causes Ruthie to break down and unknowingly tell Supergirl that they have suffered similar losses. And then that guy Kara beat up the previous day shows up, having brought Krem with him, and as they are under a red sun, Krem is able to wound both Kara and Krypto the Superdog. Fortunately, only so much that Krem's arrow shot at Kara only pierced her skin and didn't go any deeper, probably. So Supergirl can still tank more of them being shot at her as she gets closer to use what strength she still has to beat up the two savages. And Krem, seeing what he is up against, decides to run away to GTA Kara's ship, leaving her and Krypto wounded under the red sun with Ruthie.
Just do what I say.
Issue 2. Sometime later, Ruthie and Supergirl are traveling on a space bus, with Ruthie expositioning the events of the previous issue to an alien sitting between them, also as a warning not to attack or try to eat her. Eventually they reach an intergalactic bus terminal where they decide to get lunch at a space diner, where an alien with a grudge against Superman decides to get a payback by pointing a gun at Supergirl. That situation is dealt with in 3 pages of fanfare in making Kara look cool in Ruthie's point of view, before they then move on to catch the next space bus to continue their journey. Except that there's a spaceship metal-eating space dragon coming their way, and Supergirl doesn't have enough yellow sun powers to deal with it. So, as an alternative, Kara decides to literally ask the other passengers for drugs to get red kryptonite, which, unlike in Smallville taking away inhibitions, instead turns Supergirl into a Firefly-type Pokemon on a random chance effect, so that she can temporarily have the power needed to take out a space dragon, while Ruthie narrates about something relevant about it. In the aftermath of that encounter, Kara realizes the cultural differences between her and Ruthie include how she doesn't understand how to wash her hands, and so teaches her how to do that. That lesson seems to tell Ruthie without telling that Kara lost her world and family as well, and asks if she took revengeance for them, which was kind of impossible when it was a natural disaster. Go away, no one likes to remember you! As they then continue their journey to the next space bus, Kara has to punch another alien sitting between them to keep its hands to itself. Then Tom King decides to write the story in a non-linear order by remembering to explain what happened between the issues, and explain that the arrows Krem shot at Kara and Krypto had poison that Kara was able to shake off, but Krypto wasn't and needs the same poison for an antidote to be made. That is why Kara and Ruthie are traveling together, because Kara doesn't remember what Krem looks like to track him down for the poison, but Ruthie does, so she can identify him for Kara for when they eventually catch up with him.
There is no more with Ba Sing Se.
Issue 3. Supergirl and Ruthie have a ride on the planet Coron, where Krem was apparently arrested at a month or so back. Unfortunately, Coron is run by bureaucracy, which along with its locals' alien physiology makes it difficult for Supergirl to read their vitals to see if they are lying. On the plus side, however, Coron has a yellow sun, meaning that Kara has managed to get her powers recharged, but can't use her vision powers to find Krem because of the literal bureaucracy laws where everyone on the planet are seen as blue. They then end up spending the following day asking the locals of the Maple town they are in if they have seen Krem, and why there is a sign saying no purples allowed on the diner door, which then leads to them getting ambushed at their hotel room at night. Because Kara is Supergirl, she shields Ruthie from the attack and then goes to deal with it off-panel. Later they go meet the mayor who really loves his own voice, until Supergirl lifts his desk up with one hand and breaks it, telling him to try arrest her for asking about Krem. Kara decides next to take Ruthie with her to fly around until she finds the spot where the purple-colored locals used to live as second-class citizens, after the Blues sold them out to invading aliens known as the Barbon's Brigands. And Krem, who was held captive by the Blues, then talked himself to ally with the Brigands to genocide the Purples, so they could see him as one of them and give him a ride off the planet. This issue ends with Supergirl and Ruthie finding a sole survivor among the remains of the slaughtered Purples.
Me ollaan ihan eksyksis. Eikä olla. No annako mäkin kato välillä sitä karttaa? Enkä anna. Sä kyllä suunnistat ihan päin prinkkalaa. Enkä suunnista.
Issue 4. So after leaving Coron, Supergirl and Ruthie follow Krem and the Branbon's brigade's trail to planet Eskhalm's moon Ilkolm, where Krem has mercilessly slaughtered the locals so badly that the survivor who lived through to tell the tale needs to be spoon-fed while telling Kara and Ruthie what happened. They then move on to planet Tilius, where another local is digging up graves for more of Krem's victims, which Kara as a nice person volunteers to do with super speed to get it done quickly to save time. And then they go to another planet where Kara tries to play a psychiatrist to another local alien who was not there when Krem and the Brigands killed her family. And then they go to another planet where Kara tells Ruthie to stay outside while she watches the archived footage of the slaughter brought by Krem and the Brigands, watching of which makes Kara look like that meme. And then they go to see a public execution of a captured brigand, and then when having gone to see another planet where the local pacifist monks have been slaughtered, Kara has to fly to the closest sun to be isolated enough to express her horrors by screaming and crying. Or at least that is what I think is happening here. And then they stop at another planet where Kara almost decides to send Ruthie back home, because she now knows what Krem looks like and doesn't need Ruthie to... ja vitut. And then they move onward together because Kara is too tired to argue with Ruthie's convictions for revenge.
That's the
secret grand adventure of the infamous Jack Sparrow. He spent 3 days lying on a beach drinking rum.
Welcome to the Caribbean, lad.
Issue 5. Okay, this issue opens with Supergirl and Ruthie having managed to catch Krem having downed some opponent on his way, and is able to reflect them coming at him with something Kara recognizes as magic, and it ends up trapping them in some place called Barenton that has a green kryptonite sun and monsters. Unlike Superman, who had been previously trapped there and was rescued by the Justice League, Kara and Ruthie need to get to a shade to wait until the sun sets while avoiding the monsters. When Kara tries to not die while falling unconscious, Ruthie has to pull her weight in guarding her from the monsters, also by trying to talk to them, probably as a distraction before delivering the killing blow. Oi herra jumala. Long story short is that some monsters come to eat the remains of the monster Ruthie slew, and then fly away when Kara accidentally uses her heat vision on them while barely awake. Then at one point, Ruthie has to keep Kara from going to get water from the nearby monster-infested lake, and when the sun has almost set, they get attacked by another monster that Kara essentially pushes away. And then they leave that awful place when the sun is set, so Kara's powers, what's left of them, are enough to reach the closest yellow sun. Issue 6. Okay, this issue opens with Supergirl again catching up with Krem, while also remembering back to the last days of Krypton. Krem throws on another one of those Mordrub globes that sent her to the location of the previous issue, which Kara cannot just dodge and actually needs to use her Comet the super horse to ride away from it across space. The experience is framed with Ruthie's narration to be comparable to Kara being rocketed away from Krypton like her cousin, which Kara seems to have told Ruthie lasted longer than a day. Like I showcased in my Superman Brainiac/Unbound video, Kara's father Zor-El had been able to save Argo City as a floating city, but unlike with how using Brainiac's technology lured Brainiac to come finish the job, the landmass that Argo City was on began to turn into kryptonite, and Kara's mother Allura was the first casualty. They tried to have all the survivors work to put a lead shield between them and the ground, but ultimately all the 1800 survivors fell either to the kryptonite poisoning or the exhaustion from installing the lead shield. And Supergirl as the main character lived through that to build crypt for the fallen, until the floating Argo City eventually floated into a storm that rained fire and brimstone down on them. All because they didn't have Brainiac's technology to drive them to anywhere else. More and more bodies hit the floor, and eventually Zor-El decided to build that rocket for Kara to be sent after Kal-El on Earth. No longer as the little girl that Zor-El saw her as, but as a woman forced to grow up way too fast. Back to the present day. Supergirl flies on Comet to that part of space that the colorist Matthews Lopez was probably told to leave uncolored for the purpose of the effect of the location, where the Mordu globe has run out of its energy to be dissolved on touch. The issue ends with Kara and Ruthie going back to Krem, knowing he could not have had time to create another one, and is only armed with a sword and arrows.
Mitä helvettiä?
Issue 7. Okay, and at this point where this issue opens, Kara has left Comet to both protect Ruthie as well as to keep her from killing Krem, while she herself is busy as Supergirl fighting the Brigand's warship in space. Ruthie so decides to play with her food with Krem being tied up, and oi herra jumala, I wasn't going to do nothing, is a double negative. That means Ruthie was going to do something. Anyway, Krem, knowing that Ruthie is alone and that he is at her mercy, either knows that he has nothing left to lose or is just a jerk, so he begins to tell her the circumstance that actually led to him killing her father. As a King's agent, Krem used to go after the subjects of the monarchy he worked for and tell different jokes about them to see how the people responded to them. Basically, go along laughing at the jokes and you'll eventually be executed, but Ruthie's father was one of those people who took offense for his king and demanded Krem to immediately apologize for his rude words. Krem supposedly blue screen error to that feedback and fell down to his factory installed settings, from which he then came back to reality like James Sunderland at the beginning of Silent Hill 2 to find himself having stabbed Ruthie's father to the gut. That is the easiest way I can explain all that word salad. But in the end, Krem does not regret what he did and sounds like he is justified with what he did. All the while, he also seems to be aware that his allies above fighting Supergirl will eventually be coming to save him. Around this time, the brigands have managed to overpower Supergirl and she has to call Comet to come help her with reverse psychology, which conflicts with his role in keeping Ruthie from killing Krem. So the cliffhanger is that Ruthie has to swear she won't, so Comet can go help Supergirl, but Ruthie still approaches Krem with the sword taken out.
Well, Rooster, I'm shot to pieces. Seems neither of us is to see Judge Parker.
Issue 8, and so Krem tells Ruthie to just get it over with, knowing that his death will be avenged by the brigands once they get through Supergirl and land onto the planet they are on. Up there, Comet gets himself wounded and killed before it even manages to help Kara freed from the binds she has been tied into, while Ruthie decides to free Krem and challenge him into a dual execution where the sword is put into the ground and they stand on the opposite sides of it, giving them both an equal chance to run and grab it to kill the other one. Around the same time, Supergirl manages to free herself on a second wind from seeing Comet's demise, and her fight with them happens as Ruthie kicks Krem when he reaches for the sword, and realizes that Krem seems to be weak to kicks when he manages to grab the sword. Getting it back, Ruthie begins to tell Krem a speech she had been practicing about what her father meant to her, and retaliates to Krem lunging at her by cutting off all the fingers from his dominant hand. After saying her speech, Ruthie goes for the killing blow, but keeps missing about 5 times until Supergirl arrives to bring Comet's remains, and tries to clumsily explain how he is now in a human male form, as well as that the brigands have fled away to be hunted down later. Kara also reveals that Krypto is fine and she made up the story about needing the antidote, just so she could have an excuse to hunt Krem with Ruthie to teach her how killing is wrong in more than just words. The long journey they have both come in hunting down Krem, where Supergirl did as much kindness and showed feats of strength to Ruthie. All the different phases of evil have opened her eyes to the reality, where even when bad people like Krem and the brigands are going after people they see as lesser than them, there will still be good people like Supergirl to stand up against them. Which is why Ruthie does not want to see Kara lowering herself to doing her dirty work. And that is the best way I can summarize this long monologue. So feel free to pause the video and read it for yourself for your own conclusions. Anyway, Ruthie tells Kara about to use the sword on Krem, that enough killing has happened already, and they should use their time to bury Comet's human remains while going back to Krypto and
1 eternity later.
punish Krem with a life sentence in the Phantom Zone, or for the lifespan of Ruthie herself when she is an old woman, by the time when she has written a book covering their adventure during this story. AKA about 300 years during which Kara herself has barely aged at all as a Kryptonian, unlike how Superman himself looked like this in Kingdom Come 20 years after the then present day status quo. While Krem has become a changed man during his time in the Phantom Zone, step by step through those 3 centuries, his attempted apology means nothing to Ruthie, who responds to it by hitting him with her walking stick and leaving the weakened old man he has been reduced into to lay on the ground. As Supergirl also walks away, the narration from Ruthie's book reveals that she wrote into it that Kara did kill Krem, whose fate is left ambiguous as the story ends. I should probably mention that I watched the 2010 adaptation of True Grit while editing this video, and I can totally see what inspirations Tom King took from it. With Supergirl being Jeff Bridges, Ruthie being Hailey Steinfeld, Krem was Josh Brolin, and Comet was Matt Damon. I understand that Tom King also wanted to use Lobo in this story but was told not to by his editors, and that is likely why Jason Momoa is going to be in the movie, as well as that he originally wanted to make this story be 12 issues long. Let's get back to that later, because on its own, Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is mostly told from Ruth's perspective, with her as the main character riding on Supergirl's name. That way she is like Morgan Freeman's character in Shawshank Redemption with Kara as Tim Robbins. Yes, I watched that movie while editing this video too. However, when acknowledging how the previous Supergirl comic series have gone, after she was brought back from the dead in the mid-2000s, this kind of shake-up was probably seen as a necessity to break the previous mold, but that still doesn't stop it from looking like a prototype screenplay for a movie or a television show. Structurally, I think each issue was meant to serve some purpose after the first one kicked the story into motion, with the second issue focusing on Kara and Ruthie finding out how to travel together, the third issue being the first of many places where they would see the ugliness of the universe hiding out in front of them, fifth issue being where Ruthie was meant to grow stronger on her own while Kara was out of commission, sixth issue finally showing how Kara's Supergirl origin has been retconned into being now, and the final 7th and 8th issues being the two-parter finale. No, I did not just randomly ignore the 4th issue, because that is the one where the editorial meddling cutting this from a 12 issues long series into 8 issues is the most visible, with the multiple locations Kara and Ruthie visit following Krem and the Brigand's carnage. Unfortunately, as you may have noticed, the constant and then ended up turning it from what was likely meant to be a horrifying series of events in seeing the losses suffered by the bad guys' victims into a desensitizing chain of how am I not supposed to laugh at this montage? I assume Tom King wanted Kara and Ruthie to go to those locations in their own separate issues to keep the tone consistent, but cutting the number of issues from 12 to 8 forced him to mash them all into that one issue. That is also why I put Not Tomorrow from Silent Hill 1 to play during my commentary on that issue, because I knew I had to somehow balance out the way I realized I was coming across. I'm not sure how well that cutting affected the ending finale, like with the video game where some side quests were not finished, but ultimately Supergirl's fight with the Brigands, with Comet's demise for some emotional reactions, only ends up being used as background noise with them both being side characters to Ruthie and Krem. Up until Tom King tried to pull an Action Comic 775 by having Kara almost kill Krem instead of Ruthie, to show how horrifying it would be for someone who doesn't kill to act as an executioner. Before that, Ruthie and Krem's characterizations in the previous issue and a half is shown probably in the same veins as with Matty Ross and Tom Chaney in True Grit, with their duel for the sword likely being a way to help Ruthie kill Krem as a kill or be killed instinct, rather than a too easy/too hard execution. Because when Ruthie had Krem at her mercy in having won the duel, she failed 5 times to deliver the killing blow. Maybe because Supergirl was able to get to her, even when Krem was portrayed so unrepentant to murdering Ruthie's father that it took 300 years in the Phantom Zone to feel remorse. Before that, his justification for having killed Ruthie's father because his method errored to its default setting didn't make him go oops or think how to avoid it happening again. Krem just went along with what he kept doing before and then joined up with the Brigands, whose connection to the monarchy he served as a King's agent was told somewhat ominously. I don't think Ruthie's narration even mentioned who that King Krem served even was, or if he was aware of what Krem was doing in his name, which would have probably been the storyline likely cut out of those missing 4 issues. And that then makes the finale feel a little rushed and cramped. Art-wise, I can only acknowledge how Tom King is somehow able to get very talented artists to work with him on his projects, and Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow is not an exception to that rule with Bilquis Evely and Mateus Lopez, whose art and coloring carry the story with expressions, backgrounds, and bittersweet tones that the story has. But knowing how Tom King has gotten this good artists to work with him before and after this comic came out, I cannot shake off the feeling that these too good of an artist being given to work with him are also used as a distraction to hide the flaws in the stories he writes. Like the fact that Supergirl herself was used as a supporting character in Ruthie's story in this comic, and if she was replaced with someone else, like Lobo, how much of it would change and how much of it would stay the same. Now, before ending this video, I'm preparing to get ready for the Supergirl movie's premiere on Friday. I am going to see it as a comparison review that I am. I suppose the last thing to acknowledge is the place where the comic stands as a part of DC Comics history. Back in 2021 and 2022 when it came out, DC was going through its Infinite Frontier era following Dark Knight's death metal, which made the attempt to yet again streamline all the different continuities together. And Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow had that on another retcon retelling of Kara's origin on how she was sent to Earth from Argo City. Except that unlike in Jeff Johns' Superman Brainiac story where Brainiac came to finish the job on the life raft that Argo City had been turned into to survive Krypton's destruction, Tom King decided to make it a slower death and be that god who wasn't that kind to let Krypton die in a day. Mark Waid would later expand Kara's origin in Batman Superman World's Finest series by making Superman put her in an orphanage like in pre-Crisis, and combine it with her post-Crisis origin in the New History of DC Universe to explain how she could have died and then come back after the Crisis on Infinite Earths. But those two are their own too long separate comic stories to be acknowledged more in this video. With that said, I think I'm done with everything I have to say about Tom King's Supergirl Woman of Tomorrow, and now I'm going to take a break for the next few days leading up to the movie's release. Until we see again in my Fresh from the Theater review, remember to do all the usual YouTube things such as liking this video, comment what you have to say about the comic, Supergirl, and Tom King in general, share this video for more people to see, and subscribe to my channel for everything else I have plans to do next. Also, ding the bell to be alerted for a chance to chat with me when I do gaming streams, and may your heart be your guiding key.